Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. Welcome back, and thank you again for joining us at the 7th Annual International HIT Lab Innovators Summit. It is my great pleasure to welcome this next panel about blockchain and healthcare. Starting now, we'll have Dr. Alex Cahana, the founding member of the BT Block Health Group, the UN SEFTA expert on blockchain and advisor for Concise Health, will be leading this discussion titled Blockchain and Healthcare, Evidence versus Expectation. Joining him are Heather Flannery, founder and CEO of Consensus Health, Bashir Agboola, CTO at Hospital for Special Surgery, and Vadim Shepel, Director of Strategy and Consult at Pfizer. Please join me in welcoming this panel. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks, Justin. And thank you all for joining what will be a very exciting, as always, a panel. And like Justin said, it's about everything blockchain, past, present, and future. For those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Alex Cahana. I am, for many, known as a crypto health Sherpa, and trying to blockchain the world through these type of technologies. I have with me dear friends, and I'll let them start to introduce themselves and their connection to the blockchain world. So why don't we start with Heather? Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cahana. Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here at this HIT Lab event. My name is Heather Flannery. I'm the founder and chief executive officer of Consensus Health. Consensus Health is a commercially independent spinoff from Consensus AG, one of the largest blockchain organizations in the world. In addition to my role leading Consensus Health, I also chair a standards development working group at IEEE, P2418.6, which is at the intersection of blockchain, machine learning, and the healthcare and life sciences industry's unique requirements. I'm also honored to serve as the co-chair for the HIMSS Blockchain Task Force for the prior 2 years. That's the Health Information Management Systems Society, and for the chair as the chair for the coming up FY21 year. So I wear a number of hats. I'm a little bit of a glutton for punishment for volunteerism, but it's actually, there's a method to my madness because all of that work aligns and intersects with one another as we together with colleagues and friends and partners seek to drive positive transformation of our industry. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Heather. Yes. Bashir, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, hi, thank you. And thanks for having me. So I'm Bashir Agboola. I'm the technology officer at the Hospital for Special Surgery. We are an academic medical orthopedic hospital. The hospital is ranked #1 in orthopedics, #3 in rheumatology in the nation. I see myself as a crypto enthusiast, been interested in the field for a few years. And along with Heather, I serve on the HIMSS blockchain for healthcare task force for the past couple of years. It's exciting. It's a great opportunity for me to learn about the technology and to work with really brilliant people that are changing the industry, changing the direction we're going with this technology, such as Heather and I think Alex as well, and a number of folks in HIMSS task force. Prior to HSS, I worked for a number of years at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, also in the infrastructure and operations space. I like to think of myself as someone who lives between the intersection of technology and business, and working with enterprise blockchains has been a really fantastic opportunity for me, both in terms of learning and also in terms of trying to help my organization and other organizations take advantage of what's shaping up to be a really great technology.
Great, thank you so much, Bashir. And Vadim, tell the audience a little bit about what you're up to.
Thanks so much, Alex, and thanks for having me on the panel today. So by way of introduction, I'm a director on the strategy and consulting team at Pfizer, and I'm responsible there for developing the corporate strategy for Pfizer's vaccine and hospital business units. I've been at Pfizer for a number of years now, about 5 years already, and I had a number of roles in what used to be business analytics organizations, so thinking about how we can apply machine learning, AI to solve critical business challenges. Prior to Pfizer, I worked for several years in global health, where the ultimate mission of that work was to expand access to medicines for HIV and malaria in low and middle income countries. So through that work, I was very fortunate to get on the ground experience in East and Southern Africa and see potential that healthcare innovation, and particularly through technology, can have on public health. My interest in blockchain is very much homegrown. So I have a computer science background. I grew up coding. I'm always keen to play around with the newest technology. And so 2 or 3 years ago, I began to get more interested in blockchain beyond cryptocurrencies, specifically as it applies to healthcare, and kind of fell down the rabbit hole. So here I am. So I'm very excited to be on the panel today, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Vadim. And first of all, I hope all of you enjoyed Thanksgiving and that you celebrated it safe and they're all COVID safe. Why don't we start with Bashir? At the one of the most renowned hospitals, if not the best, I'm sure, hospital in the country and in New York City. Can you tell us a little bit about what is going on in the context of COVID? And, being CTO and all the I would say importance of managing data and managing the information that comes in. Tell us a little bit about what's going on, first of all, in the hospital. I'm sure that the audience is keen to know, but also, has blockchain been used or helped, or does it do anything in this time of pandemic?
So what's going on for folks in the Northeast, in the New York area? We've all probably heard the governor talk yesterday about the resurgence we're witnessing in Erie County and the potential for some pulse in that area of the state. So it reminds me of what happened here in the spring in the New York metro area, where we were really hit with the pandemic at that time. And HSS were considered to be an elective hospital for the most part. Orthopedic considered elective. They're not acute care like cancer or diabetes. So at that time, we had to pause what we normally do in terms of caring for orthopedic patients, and we took in COVID-19 patients. So we really pivoted from being a specialist orthopedic hospital to taking care of COVID-19 patients at the height of the pandemic in this area. One of the things that highlighted also was the need for data sharing. There was a lot of confusion nationally, globally at that time in terms of not only understanding the disease itself, but data around infection and spread. And thankfully, Johns Hopkins, the hospital had a really good facility that many organizations globally tapped into in terms of trying to understand the progression of the disease in the country and globally. So, but the pandemic highlighted, amongst many things, which I'm sure we're going to talk about today, the need for proper and real-time data sharing. Unlocking data from the hardened data silos that we've built up around our organizations. And we had to do that just for data security and privacy, and for competitive advantages. In some cases, we had to build those silos around our data. But then that makes it difficult to share. And when you're dealing with a disease like COVID-19, you do need to share data. So it's highlighted the need for data sharing amongst parties involved in caring for people or in preventing the disease. And since then, I would say this year, in fact, there has been an offspring of lots of initiatives geared towards solving that problem. And many of them are looking to leverage blockchain towards that. So I'm excited at that, even though right now we're not necessarily using blockchain-enabled technologies to solve the present problems, but I think we're really close, and we can talk about some of those projects as we go along.
Fascinating, Bashir. And I think you raised an excellent point that what might seem for the audience an easy question like, oh, how many ventilators or how many hand sanitizer and toilet paper do we need? These are actually really hard questions that require collaboration to give good real-time answers. Vadim, everybody now is excited talking about vaccines and vaccinations and, Pfizer. And tell us a little bit about what's going on in your world. I'm sure it's blockchain rage all day long.
Thanks so much, Alex. So, of course, very proud to represent Pfizer in the work that we've done in the vaccines, and definitely proud to be part of that work. I think beyond, before I even get to blockchain, I think what this year really has shown us, and building off what Bashir has said, is about the need for collaboration. So you've seen maybe the Moving with the Speed of Science campaign that came out earlier from Pfizer and partner companies. And obviously we have a partnership with BioNTech that allowed us to get this vaccine to the market in record speed. So I think there's been a recognition that no one company can do it alone, and that we really need to kind of unlock the thinking of how we can collaborate and how we can work together. So in respect to DLT and blockchain, I think it's, the main challenge in my mind has always been not so much the technology, but getting companies to think and work differently. And I think we're kind of on that journey right now to understand that, blockchain, it's not a specific solution. It's not a pilot that you will run in the corner of your organization. And it's not a silver bullet, right? But it's really an infrastructure that you may need to build in partnership with the public sector, in partnership maybe with your competitors, right? So I think just that recognition alone has been powerful in getting technologies like blockchain to be more operational now than they were probably a year ago. So the two examples that come to mind are our participation in PharmaLedger in the EU and MediLedger in the US, where we have a few projects in place to tackle the supply chain challenges. And I, of course, can speak about them later in the hour. But that to me has been very encouraging to see, just because of that level of participation and collaboration.
That's very interesting, Vadim. Thank you. And it kind of almost feels that COVID has confronted us with a new reality, and that we might need to kind of revisit certain ways of doing things, and that there might be different ways. You mentioned this idea of collaborative competition, co-opetition. That's a very interesting concept that in the business world we need to get used to. Heather, how do you see what has COVID done, for you, for the interest in the technologies that you're developing?
Thank you, Dr. Cahana. It's been both inspiring and tragic at once. And I know I'm talking about polarizing emotions, but here's why both inspiring and tragic. I'll begin with the tragic side, because enormous numbers of people have lost their lives. We've, as a global civilization, profoundly struggled to react and respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. And those of us who have been in the blockchain space for years, focusing on creating brand new classes of critical data infrastructure for humanity, all of us, I'm sure, I know I'm not alone, had a sense of profound loss and frustration that our good work, our important work, didn't move fast enough. We didn't make it in time to have these incredibly powerful and transformative technologies at the fingertips of humanity when it was needed. And that's tragic, and that's sad. And it makes me reconsider all of my life choices on what might I have done differently to move things faster, to better address barriers and blockers that I'd spent so much time focusing on. A lot of my personal focus in the industry has been more on the barriers and blockers than it has been on the value props. It's been, how do we move these barriers and blockers out of our way so that the avalanche of value that so many of us see can actually be realized? So that's a little dark and doom and gloomy, and I apologize for that, but it's authentic. I really have a sense of frustration that more hadn't been achieved before we were hit with this worst pandemic in multiple generations. However, with all of that aside, I actually sit here right now on December 1st, 2020, feeling powerfully inspired and full of gratitude and a sense of incredible optimism. Because as much as we were behind and we were late, in my view, in my own estimation, with what needed to happen, I think that we have shaved 5 years off of a transformation and deployment life cycle shift. And 5 years, that's a somewhat arbitrary guess, because it's hard to know when cultural tipping points and collective consciousnesses come to an understanding that they have readiness to change. They have the means and the ability to change. They have the funding and capital formation necessary to affect change. Was it going to take 5 years? Was it going to take 10? I'm not sure, but I am certain that it is now moving at lightning speed. That I am positive of. And there is sufficient recognition and awareness across our industry that foundational structural transformation is on the critical path to being able to get us all the way through the other side of this pandemic, and hopefully give humanity a way to prevent epidemics from becoming pandemics in our next inevitable cycles in this model. So I would say that it is overall very, very positive and very hopeful. And my attention is turned to, I would say, the back half set of challenges of the whole arc of the pandemic at this point, and prevention of future pandemics, and preventable human suffering. So that's my point of view.
Well, thank you, Heather, so much for this not only heartfelt but passion-felt, message to the audience. I too, when people ask me, so what did COVID do for you, and they, expect me to say, well, I'm working remote and I'm not eating out that much. I say, no, actually, people are picking up the phone and say, Alex, this thing that you've been working the last 5-6 years that I had no idea what it is, maybe you should explain that to me. So I do share with you that feeling that there has been an acceleration in the realization and the effectuation of change that needs to happen to make us more resilient, if anything, for the years to come. Bashir, back to you. In a hospital, and especially an elective hospital, which is a quick volume, quick throughput, lean and mean apparatus, how do you see the path of least resistance of implementation of what you think are good use cases of this type of distributive technology?
Yeah, so prior to the pandemic, I used to think the low-hanging fruit of enterprise blockchains in healthcare, in our part of in our side of healthcare, would be in areas like credentialing, provider data management, or even revenue cycle. I used to think those were the low-hanging fruits because they're just highly inefficient areas of healthcare, highly inefficient, very repetitive processes that don't always yield a lot, even though we have some conventional technologies now being directed at those problem areas. We're talking about using RPAs, robotic process automation, and some other technologies. But I'd always thought that, if we could get people to focus blockchain technologies in this area, we will see a lot of gain there. And there are many projects in that space as we speak. Many of those projects I'm sure you're familiar with. But since the pandemic, I've seen a shift, kind of like what Heather was saying, in terms of the acceleration of development of the necessary technologies and even processes there. I've seen a shift towards identity management, leveraging identity management in our space. So I'll give you an example. Anytime I go into the hospital, and I was there on site yesterday, I go in sometimes, I work from home sometimes, I have a health pass. I fill out a questionnaire on my phone, and based on my responses, I have a green pass or a red pass that says I can walk into the building. So as I approach the building, I show that to the security guys, and they look at it. Okay, they wave me through. Means I'm good to come in. Now, it mirrors, even though that's a very simple system, it mirrors some of the work that's happening in the industry right now around digital health passports, either by IBM or Common Pass. And I see things like that coming into our organization and really being able to help us, even whether it's with integrating such technologies into our digital front door app. Many hospitals, many healthcare organizations now are focused on developing some of the same capabilities that retail has had or banking has had for years, which is you want to have a digital front door, which represents how your patients will access your service and information about your service. So healthcare is slow to the game. We're just getting there, right? And so imagine integrating some of those capabilities also into those apps that we've developed or are in the process of developing, such that not the records that the patients of maybe their COVID-19 status or their temperature before they left home or other things that we want to know before they come on site or as they come on site is there. And so I do really think that in the next 12 months, as you know, hopefully when we get a respite from this second wave, we will begin to see more awareness of the effort and things we've made this past 8-9 months in blockchains.
I really like, Bashir, what you said, you know, kind of that transition of let's do automation and move from, you know, a frictionful to a frictionless environment. It's almost like, yeah, you know, the blockchain will be an optimization technology, whereas now you're saying, oh my God, this is really something more fundamental, and this is our digital ID. This is the center, and a lot of the work that I've been doing at the United Nations on SDG 16.9, which is identity for all, because without identity, you can't do anything. You can't get access to healthcare, you can't get access to a bank account or even vote or things of that sort. So you've touched on a really important use case that now suddenly has come to the forefront. I wanted to ask Vadim, you know, you started to talk about a collaboration of unprecedented size, and, you know, you're part of a company that has huge capabilities and technological delivery. Where do you see, you know, for me comes to mind the whole supply chain and vaccination. What is kind of your thoughts about where are we going with the use case in DLT?
Yeah, absolutely, Alex. So I think there's a combination of different factors that will affect the trajectory of this, right? On one hand, in the consumer space, consumers are increasingly demanding digital health and low-touch healthcare options. And also in the industry, we already were experiencing a shift in care outside of the traditional channels like the hospital into home care, into the pharmacy. So I think all of those trends have been accelerated. At the same time, you know, companies like Pfizer, we're living through a time of limited budgets and stretched resources, not just in the private sector, but in the public sector as well. So increasingly, everyone is being forced to do more with less. And I think that will actually drive the adoption of technologies like DLT, because it kind of forces you to think of where can I get the greatest benefit from an immutable source of truth that will help resolve so many of the bottlenecks that contribute to the administrative burden, the time constraints, you know, that we encounter. So I think absolutely we'll continue to see innovation in the supply chain space, especially, you know, as you know, our vaccine will require that greater cold chain storage. So we'll need to innovate there. And something like DLT, I think, can be applicable to facilitate that. But I also, you know, working in vaccines, I will build on what Bashir has said. To me, the thought that's been in the back of my mind this whole year is we will get to a world where we'll have a vaccine, and we'll have several vaccines, and we'll need to restart the world in a way, right? Of re-enter offices, you know, travel again. And to me, that's been kind of a no-brainer in terms of the need for a digital identity of some sort, or very simple credentialing. You know, do you have immunity? Have you received the vaccine? You don't need to put the whole EHR on it at once. You could start with something simple. But, you know, in my mind, it's kind of mind-boggling how we still in 2020 are using yellow cards for yellow fever vaccine or paper records to take with us when we travel, or referral forms. This is, to me, is a bit bonkers. So I think we are hopefully moving to a world where this can be done. Now, of course, there are ethical implications. We don't want to live in a Skynet world or a Minority Report world. And so I think the opportunity to get this right is great. But also, if we don't do this right, I think the dangers are very real as well. So we need to keep that in mind. So like Bashir, I've been very encouraged and excited by a flurry of activity in the space this year. You have the IBM Health Pass, of course, you have the cross-border health services in the EU, you have different startups working in the space, so it's really exciting. But I think what we need to keep in mind for next year is how can we combine this technology with a clear business case for the stakeholders that are involved, so we can incentivize their buy-in, incentivize their behavior. How can we establish a clear governance model so they can collaborate in a meaningful way? And I think the last point is how can we move from building quote unquote minimum viable products to building minimum viable ecosystems and really have a way to make that thrive. So that's kind of top of mind for me. We'll have to see where this goes, and yeah, excited about the possibilities.
Well, you know, it's great hearing and listening to you, Vadim, because you packed in so many things, and I think that what connects everything is really this idea of truth and trust. And
Yep.
you know, if I just take, you know, the vaccination as an example, you want to make sure that Alex is Alex and the vaccine is the vaccine, and that it was transferred the way it's supposed to be, and that the effect is maximal with least waste or opportunity for fraud or corruption on the way. So that's how I explain to people when they say, what is blockchain? I say, well, you know, it's the software for the social problem of trust. We just now live in a world where we are challenged by trust. And I think that that's a great point that you made. I want to kind of ask Heather at this point. Bashir talked about tracking people, and Vadim is talking about tracking stuff. Is that the same? Can we track people as we track stuff? Do you have any concerns about the development of a surveillance state with geo-tracking and contact tracing? And what technologies you know and you're part of their development that would help us or preserve us from what's going, you know, and being traced like a FedEx package?
Well, absolutely, Dr. Cahana. I do share those concerns and agree strongly with Vadim's point about not wanting to live in a Skynet or Minority Report future. There has always been a tension between freedom and security, or freedom and safety. And we're living in that tension today, now, as our cultures are forced to make decisions between public health or safety and freedom in the form of privacy and the kind of dignity and sovereignty and agency that comes with that. Fortunately, while blockchain is a critical path component of new technologies that are necessary in all the ways that we've been discussing to deliver trust and truth, alliterative and brilliant as usual, Dr. Cahana. That technology alone is insufficient to also deliver the privacy and sovereignty and agency requirements that we as a species have and hold dear. And something that is converging with blockchain. So is deployed via blockchain, is enabled by blockchain, but is something else, is something separate, is what I call advanced privacy preservation, or privacy in depth. Privacy in depth is not one technology, but actually a number of technologies that are all reaching commercial viability and industrial scalability at around the same time that that blockchain is. And they are now coming together at an engineering level so that the lines between those technologies are getting very blurry very fast. And that's a good thing, because they need to come together. The heart of the matter of how those technologies work is they use novel forms of cryptography, as well as new hardware dependent models for cryptographic protection of data. And they use those combinations of technologies to make it such that it's possible to compute on data without exchanging it. It's possible to perform analytics, to train machine learning models, and even to deploy trained models in a decentralized and secure manner, all without necessarily requiring counterparties to exchange or have visibility to information. I think, Bashir, you wisely pointed out that the reason our silos are surrounded by huge brick walls of such brittleness is due to the privacy and compliance boundaries that we necessarily live in our industry. This introduction of this family of technologies is the first time we've had a material way to resolve that polarity that we need to choose between the priority of freedom and the priority of security, or the priority of public health and the priority of privacy. We no longer need to make that polarizing choice. And it's these new technologies are technologically complex, but I think that rather than thinking about how they work technically, it's more important to realize what their impact is. When radio was introduced to human civilization, only a tiny percentage of the humans understood at an engineering level how a radio worked. It was indistinguishable from magic, as all sufficiently advanced technologies are. And so what we have here is another set of new technologies that are equally complex. And what's important is why they matter, because they are introducing such fundamental structural change possibilities that we have to reconsider our regulatory frameworks, reconsider the way that we do business, the way that we organize commerce, and candidly, the basic systems architecture patterns of our entire global infrastructure that are all built in that polarizing choice of are you able to share the data? Do you have to centralize the data? So I'd be happy to go into what each of those technologies are, but I think I'll pause there for a reaction, or if that was what you were looking for, Dr. Cahana.
Let's indeed switch gears, and I think that you bring an incredible important point where, as being obsessed about the how, we need to understand first the why. And why are we doing this? To build a system so that our response for COVID 2021 and 22 will be a more robust one. And leveraging the successes that we see now in certain areas, we can also minimize or extinguish the failures that we've gone through. And this takes me to Bashir. We've been talking about a blockchain, but I want to kind of move to not only data, but the actionable information that comes from it through AI and machine learning. And Heather brought a great point about, wow, analyzing data without even looking at it, or visiting the data behind the firewall, and being more compliant. How do you see these blockchain and AI, or blockchain and other enabled technologies work in your setting?
So the opportunity that I see there first is, if we think about the challenge of data sharing and how people are attempting to solve that today, I think of a project, the organization, the MIPASA, that I guess probably, I'm not sure when they got their start, but I know that they became more active, or I became aware of them during the pandemic, and their whole framework for data sharing. I think that's probably something that organizations such as my hospital and other healthcare organizations can think about. In other words, approach data sharing in almost as a open, but in an open but permission fashion, meaning it's open, anyone can participate in that data sharing framework, for lack of a better word for it. But it's permission in the sense that, of course, for you to participate, there are some rules and governance that we all have to be agreeable to. So we want to open up data, but we don't want to make it just free for all. So that's how I see this shaping out. I don't know exactly the exact technical mechanisms that this would eventually, that's going to be required to do this, but conceptually, I would imagine that we're really coming out of the dark ages of data, where everybody just sits on their data and nobody else what's buried in there. we're moving beyond that. And blockchain is going to be that bridge that allows us to safely share what we want to share without compromising privacy or regulatory compliance, and without necessarily undermining our intellectual property assets or market competitiveness. That's what I was looking for, market competitiveness. We don't want to lose advantage of being, the leader in this space or in that space. But at the same time, we want to offer up data for the good of humanity, for the common good, because we might be sitting on insight that could lead to the next major breakthrough in curing a disease like COVID-19 or another ailment that afflicts society.
Well, I think you're bringing a great point that I say often, that none of us is as good as all of us, and that's actually a good business model as well. It's not just a virtue to say that, but it's also good business, bigger, better, and more impactful. And the fact that I am sure that if we would have this conversation 5 years ago or 3 years ago, we would never say these things. So this really, I'm sure, impresses upon the audience to know that a CTO of a large elective hospital in New York City is saying, yeah, we need to imagine these type of insightful collaborations to answer the important questions. Vadim, in this question of IP or things that we discover that are ours versus theirs, the whole idea of, drug discovery, how do you see the acceleration, if any, of drug discovery through, projects like Melody, where we use blockchain and AI? Can you tell a little bit to the audience about that?
Absolutely, Alex. So I think a lot of what we discussed here is very relevant in the fact that of building a common infrastructure that we could all benefit from. So in the drug discovery space, we've already seen innovations actually through Pharma Ledger of an example where we're using blockchain in the clinical supply chain space to kind of accelerate a lot of the waste that happens there. So it's basically seeing how can we limit the visibility, how can we get around the limited visibility that we have, where we only see one level up or one level down with our next trading partner. How can we go from the full spectrum of through drug discovery, through manufacturing, through warehousing, all the way that this is delivered to the patient? So I definitely see this as an opportunity for us to say, okay, what is a truly innovation within the company versus the infrastructure. So for instance, we don't necessarily pave the roads, right, to the factory, right? We don't have the infrastructure that allows us to get FedEx packages to our door, right? So how can we remove those things from our overall area of competency so that it's not something that we need to continue to maintain and invest in? I think just thinking broader, even beyond us, kind of the clinical trials, I think there's a lot of opportunity to leverage things like Heather mentioned, like federated learning, like to basically say, how can we have the patient level insights that we want to have that we can't have now? So for things like rare disease, that data is usually sitting in different siloed places throughout throughout the healthcare ecosystem. And the challenge, I think, for pharmaceutical companies is always, what can we leverage that sits outside of the organizations? We're constantly working with data middlemen to collect this intelligence. We're constantly, and I think, are reaching a saturation point of what can be done in data lakes and data warehouses. So I think there's a lot of potential to say that if this data sits somewhere else, what can you tap into in a compliant and secure way that can allow you to get the insights to do the work that you need to do, but not have to build that infrastructure in-house. So I do see a lot of potential in the drug discovery, but even going beyond that as well.
Thank you, Vadim, and I really appreciate you bringing up this notion of data illiquidity and how this really doesn't help to have a whole bunch of things, but it cannot, leverage really what's out there in the environment. This situational awareness that you're talking about. There's a lot. We work in a large world, And we want, it's now the global market. It's the 24/7. It's not just, something that's close to us here. Heather, before we hear from the audience, I have in the chat tons of questions. I just want to I knew this would go really fast, but just to ask you, because both Bashir and Vadim brought up the problem with governance. How do we create rules? How do we make sure that people will feel that this is fair and that no one is disenfranchised, and that we encourage good behavior and discourage bad behavior? Tell us a little bit about what guides you in your work in the IEEE and in the standards in general of creating this framework of how will this world look like?
Sure. It's an enormous topic, and I just have to first say that we're coming out of the dark ages of data is such a brilliant phrase. And Bashir, I'm going to use that constantly with full attribution. That was wonderful. And Vadim, your points about the potential of federated learning and us having reached the logistical extremes of data lakes and data centralization strategies are so spot on. But if what we're doing, to your point, Dr. Cahana, is we're creating a new class of critical infrastructure that is effectively mutualized among some set of shared actors, and in very high likelihood for sustainability and representation will need to exist in different kinds of public-private partnerships as well. So we're also spanning multiple stakeholder groups. It's not only the private sector, but other parties. There are important roles that different, let's call it cultural structures that have not been aligned in the past, need to be aligned and come together for this to work. One of them is standards development, and another is policy. Policy, legislation, regulation, and policy coming out of the public sector, which incidentally, if we, the industry, do not provide standards and do not invest the effort and the time in order to create standards, we're leaving our public sector partners and counterparts with nothing to work with from a policy perspective. Because they cannot write policy to say, so-and-so's software product is really great. We think you should use it. Instead, they have to have globally inclusive standards that they can write to and develop sound policy around. Another area is open source software development and the open movement in generally, including open science. The notion here is that while I believe there's plenty of room for private for-profit companies to be very successful, I'm running one of those, I'm bullish about our future, I believe that large parts of these critical infrastructures have to have a different approach to sustainability. There cannot be vendor lock-in. There has to be approaches where these infrastructures can operate without paying fees, without paying licensing fees, that type of thing. So there's a new model in IEEE that is a really powerful innovation that's just getting off the ground. And I'm so proud that the standard that I chair is one of the first working groups to move into this new model. And it's called IEEE Standards Association Open, or IEEE Open. And what that is a first ever combination of global standards development and open source software development that creates a model for capital formation, for sustainability, for global scaling, for the reduction of conflicts of interest among stakeholder groups that is incredibly powerful. I think that that's one amazing contribution to the future of what governance of these infrastructures could look like. And even governance itself is being developed as a standard. What are best practices for governance of blockchain infrastructures? There are, my friend and colleague Thomas Cox is chairing a standards development working group on just that point, that will be translatable via extension into healthcare and life sciences. So there's more to touch on there, but one closing thought about governance. We tend to think about these infrastructures as being owned and controlled by enterprises and governments. And while of course there is representation in governments, depending on the structure, I think it's important that we conceive of people as being fully empowered stakeholders. And that as we are looking to accomplish the things that Vadim was mentioning a few minutes ago through federated first architectures and so on, that we acknowledge that patient and person sovereign data is a critical part of our future. And that an individual can aggregate and curate more information about themselves than any enterprise ever could. And they then can participate in ethically intentional data markets. They can become an empowered actor. And I think that that's a vital part of this story, that we're talking about new classes of infrastructure, but individual data sovereignty is a part of what that infrastructure delivers, instead of thinking that that infrastructure is going to create the universe's largest ever growing centralized data lake. So I'll pause there, but thank you for letting me get that last point in.
And I think that last point is really the glue, if you wish, between all the stakeholders. And everybody agrees here. We have a representative from a large for-profit hospital. We have a large representative for a for-profit pharmaceutical. You are a technologist. What is the glue that connects? And if I do an exercise here and say, Bashir, tell me, what do you need from the technology? And you would say, I need ABC. And then I would say, Vadim, what do you need about this technology? And you would say ABC, and Heather would write notes and say, fine, I'll produce this for you. It would all boil down. We would all agree that it's all about empowering the individual. And for those who have heard me say this multiple times, it's transforming people from health service consumers to health producers. This is really what it's all about. And I want to kind of talk about that a little bit, and perhaps both Bashir and Vadim, and this is part of the questions that I'm looking at in the chat. How would this look like in your environment? So specifically, Bashir, for example, electronic health records. Do you see a future of self-sovereign electronic health records where actually people hold on to it and use it this way, in that way?
Yeah, I do. I think what I am envisioning is an extension of the work that's being done with projects such as Common Pass, which is a project driven by the Commons Project, and it has the support of the World Economic Foundation and a number of other organizations that are involved in it. And the idea, even though it's driven mostly now by what's going on with the pandemic, the idea is having a digital health passport that would be a repository of verified data about an individual. Now, the immediate focus is on COVID-19 test results, and very soon vaccination, but also other health elements can be managed that way as well. So, and the individual would have control over who gets to see that and how and when they get to use that. So I think that's not too far off from the problem we've been trying to address in healthcare of EHR interoperability, freeing up data that's locked in individual EMRs in individual health organizations. The United States, amongst the developed countries of the world, we probably have the biggest, if not one of the biggest, problems of EMR, electronic health record silos, as compared to some other developed countries where you could go anywhere in the country and your data is available because their systems are integrated. In the US, we are greatly not integrated. So, and really, I think the work and the learnings that's coming out of a blockchain during this pandemic would help address that, at least would help chart the path forward for us. And I think standards such as together by the Common Pass, or even the CCI, the COVID-19 credentials infrastructure team, that putting together some standards around that, or the commercial IBM Health Pass. Projects like that would at some point begin to sort of come together and hopefully we'll have a common standard that we can all embrace, and that would help address that problem for the long term, I think.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'll plug in that you're right that the U.S. Has a particular, I would say, environment with incumbent infrastructure that makes it a little more challenging to implement these ideas. And I personally work in Africa in implementing these self-sovereign electronic health records simply because they don't have, we're moving from analog to, so it's like Web 1 to Web 3.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're talking just like with mobile and 5G.
Yeah.
But I really love how you embrace this idea that eventually, as we figure this out with compliance, with regulation, this will be a reality. I would want Vadim to tell us a little bit about how would that look like? You know, the peer-to-peer relationships in the future of pharmaceuticals. How would that impact clinical trials? How would that impact, you know, the access that you have directly to, you know, these agents?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, Alex, I love the idea of turning kind of consumers from health data consumers into health data producers. And I think it's a very powerful idea, and something like that could be transformative in healthcare in general, but of course for pharmaceuticals as well. I think at the end of the day, pharmaceutical companies want to know who needs their product, how they're using their product, adverse effects, right? And ultimately what benefits they're providing to patients. Right now, this is done in a kind of patchwork of efforts, combining data from, as I mentioned, kind of data middlemen, or trying to understand the different challenges in interoperability between types of EHR or pharmacy records or other types of, you know, real world evidence, right? It's this great, very fragmented effort to pull together these insights. So something like that, if consumers become the owners of their data, what that does by definition inherently is that it helps solve for that interoperability challenge that I think has stymied so many efforts. And that can allow, you know, combined with something that we discussed earlier, like federated learning, that could be transformative for pharmaceutical companies, because that allows them to get the insights about who needs to be on a clinical trial. How, you know, are patients taking the medicines that they're supposed to be taking? Is there compliance? So everything that companies want to know downstream has the potential to be kind of retrieved from this. I think where the pharma industry at large has had a challenge is, what is the remit of the digital organizations in pharmaceutical companies in general? Is it to create a patient EHR record, right? Is it to create a patient credentialing blockchain, right? And I think this is where the pharmaceutical industry can actually have an incentive to come together with other stakeholders in the industry to develop that common infrastructure that we discussed today. Because personally, for instance, I don't believe that is in their remit of a pharmaceutical company to develop such an infrastructure. So I think there's a lot of potential and incentives for collaboration there.
Well, thank you, Vadim, and I hope the audience appreciates how we're really describing the future. You know, these are things that 99.8% of people will not talk about, and that you're privy really to insights of people that are actually in the fray, developing all this and describing, yes, this is how 2021, 22, and 25 can look like. So this is very exciting. We have only 6 minutes left, so I'll ask Heather one more question, and then all three of you a quick closing statement. And so Heather, when you hear both Bashir and Vadim, and it's clear that there are different flavors to the solutions that are out there. In your perfect world, how far are we from a technology perspective of building this? Is this something that it's done and we just have to pick it off the shelf? Is this something that we have to work on really hard this next year, or are we talking something that is a little bit further on?
That's a challenging question, but I'll do my best with it. My opinion is that the technology is further along than the social, cultural, legal, and financial structures that would enable and facilitate the governance and scalable adoption of these technologies. When I say that the technology is further along than those dimensions, I don't mean that it's completely ready, that we could activate billions of patients into these infrastructures by flipping a switch if we had infinite capital. But I do believe that the technology is advancing so much more quickly than the common collective culture understands that technology can advance. This has been predicted by thinkers like Ray Kurzweil and others that have demonstrated that the pace of technological change continues to accelerate. And we're talking about an exponential increase in a human animal that thinks in linear progression. And so we have a hard time appreciating how fast, in fact, these technologies are advancing and maturing. I would argue that they are advancing and maturing far more quickly than we have the ability to organize humanity in an ethically and legally appropriate way to take fullest advantage. So for those reasons, I don't believe that the technology advancement is actually the critical path in terms of barriers. The technology that is available right now today is more than sufficient to achieve what I would call realistic aims of piloting, testing, and moving through stages of deployment. Is even if we had the totally aligned collective will that we were going to flood infinite capital into this challenge and we were going to deploy globally as fast as possible, we still would have to do it in stages. There would be no possibility. You can't just snap your fingers. So with that, I would say that the technology is ready today to the extent that we would have the ability to use it, and that our scaling of the technology and integration of the technology is happening so much faster than is commonly understood. It will be there before we will be able to use it.
Well, well said, and again, you're reiterating that we're limited by our own imagination. So I appreciate that point. 30 seconds. Post-COVID world, how would it look like at the HHS? How would it look like in Pfizer? How would it look in Consensus Health? 30 seconds, Bashir, start.
So I think for me, the effort would be educating the business leadership in our organizations on the potential of this technology and how they can use the technology to solve problems that are in their area or create new value in their space that we've not even thought about. So for me, post-COVID, it's really going to be focused on education and introducing people to this technology.
Wonderful. Education and spread the good word. Vadim, post-COVID and Pfizer.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alex. Couldn't agree more with Bashir and with Heather as well in terms of that the technology may not be the limiting factor here. So I completely agree. I think we have to continue to educate everyone. I think what COVID has shown us is that we don't just have the opportunity, we have the obligation to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk in a lot of this. So I think many digital health companies and life science companies are still operating in a winner-take-all mentality. So I actually raise it as a challenge to many of the folks on the call to work with your peers, work with your executives, work with your competitors to build this digital infrastructure that we talked about today and that we so desperately need.
Great. No, it's the shift. We're feeling the shift, the seismic shift. I feel the energy. Heather, 30 seconds.
I would say that post-COVID, we're going to have a total cultural awareness that we have become dependent on access and equity in digital health, and that the digital divide that we live in and have normalized today, where there are profound disparities, especially among vulnerable populations globally, culturally, we will come to understand that that is unacceptable. And we will be moving forward in a way that brings full digital inclusion to all of humanity. In the same way that humanity is working today to bring clean water, power, basic health services, so too does digital inclusion now it's part of what it means to be a participant in our culture.
Well said. Thank you, Heather. Thank you for the panel. I knew that this would pass too fast. And again, thanks for HitLab. Back to you, Justin. And we definitely need to continue this. So continue to block change the world, and think locally and act globally. Back to you, Justin.
Alex, thank you so much. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Bashir. Thank you, Vadim. This has been a tremendous panel discussion. We really, really appreciate your perspectives. Thank you all so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
It was an honor.
Thanks, everyone.
Up now.